Yeah, we're recording it.
Awesome. Call the meeting to order and do roll call.
Andrew
Carla Pennington
Franklin,
Cross, and still Carla Pennington Cross.
And I don't know where I am on your screen.
the Brady Bunch thing.
Karen Cronwell, are
Karen
you
Cronwell.
Ben Wynn, are you here?
Yes.
Awesome. Danielle Bailey is present. I'm trying to look at my agenda on here. Is there any objection to approving the agenda?
I would ask that we address item number 1C after the budget discussion. And yes, I just thought of this now. And yes, I understand Baird's coming in at 7:30. But I think that we can't really discuss a budget issue until after we've had an update on the budget discussion.
You mean a compensation issue?
So
Yeah.
if that's the recommendation, then I would recommend we try to get a hold of Baird and we just postpone, because we have to run a district and we have to run a building and we need a principal at Parkway, no matter what our budget concerns are. So that would be my only thought. We have to run Parkway Elementary School. We have to have a substitute principal there. We have a principal that's out almost indefinitely right now. So that issue has to be addressed at some point, and I don't know why waiting until after the budget discussion has impact on those two separate issues. I would also note that there's nothing in policy that actually precludes me from appointing a substitute administrator, but I was asked to bring this to the board for information and to provide an update. So all I was going to do today was provide an update and then ask for, if the board determined they needed action, I would bring it back on January 17th. So there's no vote on that today.
So, okay, a couple things. I'm not sure I'm hearing a second to change the agenda around, although Andy, I do understand I understand your concern, and obviously I think we will address budget as part of the conversation. It is also my hope. But Allison, one thing I noted is that we didn't list any policies or anything from the employee handbook related to any of the things we're talking about tonight. So I was trying to look up and see, like, what might apply here. The only thing I wonder about and is that compensation outside of the approved budget for something. I wonder if that might fall under our budget implementation policy and actually require board approval. And I'm not sure if it does, but if we're looking at a deficit larger than the budget we've approved, and we're being asked to, or you want to have an expenditure that is now outside of that, I guess I wonder if it sort of falls within there. I'm grateful that you are bringing this to the board, not just doing it. I think that's a good step. It should, be a collaborative process. But so I just wonder if there is some policy that may apply to this.
So I guess my question on that would be, then every time we hire a substitute teacher, would I be bringing that to the board?
Because
or every time?
No, Allison, okay, hold on. I don't want to preclude you from doing your job. That's not, nobody's trying to hinder at least personally, I'm not trying to hinder Parkway having a principal. I guess
So when we approve,
there's a policy for substitutes. Sorry, let me just finish. There is a policy for you to hire substitutes when we need them. That's substitutes. This is different, and this is a larger expenditure. I'm not sure that it applies. I guess that's just the one thing I found that might apply, and was one I didn't know if anybody else had thoughts on that. But we actually
Do you approve long-term subs?
you approved building subs and staffing.
But
Those
what
are
about long-term subs?
So I guess my first, okay, we're on an agenda approval right now, so I'm sorry, I got a little off track. And I didn't hear a second for Andy's motion, so we can talk about this, I guess, further under the agenda item in closed session, right? Okay, so are there any objections to approving the agenda? I'm not hearing any, so the agenda is approved. Are there any objections to moving into a closed, wait, what would Rob want me to say? Closed session? Closed session, pursuant to sections 1983 and oh, no, sorry. I'm under the wrong agenda. Sorry, you guys.
1985C.
Thank you,
State
to discuss
statute.
employee compensation. Any objections? All right, then through unanimous consent, we will move into a closed session. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I only heard Andy.
Sorry.
It's okay. All
Aye.
right. I
Aye.
heard no objection. We're back into open session. Hello.
Oh,
I see a couple more, but I don't see cameras or screens.
We might.
Oh, maybe are they?
I don't know. They
Kim,
were
is
just
anyone
waiting
else?
room, so I
You?
let 'em-
Is Kim? Oh, okay. Well, there's Ben. Hey, Ben.
Hey.
There we go.
Hi.
I can't hear. Can anyone else hear him?
No.
Okay.
he's on mute.
There we go. And now, Kevin, I think you need to unmute.
There we go. How was that?
Very good.
Lindsay, are we waiting for anyone else?
Looks like we have one more person joining, but
I think
Allison, are
that's
you able to make
fine.
him a co-host so she can share the
Yes.
screen?
Yes. All right, so Kim, you should be a co-host now. So just as a little bit of, obviously we all know why we're here tonight, but since October, we've been doing a lot of work around creating accurate budget projections for this year and moving forward. Lindsay's been working with Baird, digging into historical, looking at this year, projecting out. So that's what they're here to share with us, the most up to date. I'm gonna be honest with you, when we met with Baird last week, right before I sent the doodle poll out to the board, I was unsettled by some of the projections, and so I'm sure that the board will be unsettled by some of the projections. And we know we're gonna have to make some adjustments and implement some strategies in order to keep moving forward and building a solid financial future for our district. So this is just the beginning of that conversation. We're obviously not asking for votes on anything, just a discussion, digging in, giving you guys that look at what we saw last week. And then we'll continue to plan for what options we want to implement short-term and long-term. So Lindsay, I don't know if you want to add anything or if you want to introduce them.
So I believe the board met Kevin is it almost a year ago. He came in, talked with the board about just referendums in general. So Kevin, and then Kim is a school business specialist. She worked in a school district prior to working with Baird, and now she is someone that business managers work with the model and just being able to dive into the specifics of it. And so she and I have been working closely together over the last month or so. Do you want to do the next slide, Kim? So we just want to talk about where we are sitting for this year and just showing what the projections are, and then also looking at the 5-year. So I'm just going to talk about the difference in the expenses that we've had this year versus last year. And then Kim will talk about, and Kevin will both talk about more of the long-term solution that we have to think about and discuss. Like Allison said, we're not asking for a vote. It just, we want to be transparent about where we're at so that we can start thinking long-term and be able to plan for it. All right, so last year, as you know, we ended with a deficit and had to use a significant chunk of our fund balance. We went into this year knowing that we would have a deficit. We have expenses like salaries, transportation, utility, the ongoing special ed costs that were obviously an increase last year and continue to be an increase. To date, we are spending less than we did last year. Last year at this point in time, to January, we were at 2 million in expenses for Fund 27, and right now we're at about 1.8 million. And then for Fund 10, we were at 8.5 million in expenses last year, and this year we're at 7 million. So it's obviously a lot of different factors that come into play. Like we've talked about some of the capital projects that we had done last year, some of the technology things. So a lot of those pieces are contributing to the less expenses. However, there's still a deficit. So after conversations with the board in the fall, Allison and I wanted to bring in tools like Baird to help project where we are and for this, like right now to the end of the year and then in futures. And after working with Kim, we dived into the details of the expenses, the historical, the current, and the future. And then we also, like by future, what we did was looked at what did we spend last year, what did we spend this year, and where were some of those big variances, and started plugging those in for the model for next year. And so when we factor in all of the expenses we have through the remainder of this fiscal year, which is our short-term borrowing payment, summer school, Fund 27 transfer, we're still looking at the deficit. And when you look at that number, this is just like worst case scenario, but we need to think worst case scenario because, like I said, if we have 1.6 million less in expenses, we are less, like that's less deficit than what's listed there. So this is kind of like worst case, but we have to kind of plan for worst case and then factoring in that we can have a little bit less in the pieces. Do you mind if I finish the slide? I just see a couple.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, Lindsay, do you want us to save our questions for when you're done completely or after a slide, or what's your preference?
If it's okay to do it at the end, just because I feel like there's a lot of questions that'll be answered throughout the presentation, but
this is hard because we only see it on the screen. So
Yeah.
I can't remember my questions as you move through.
Can you email it to us?
Yes, I'll do that right now. Actually, the one I had was missing a couple slides. I'll try emailing it to you.
I can forward it, Allison. Just give me a second, because if you open it in Google Slides, you lose some of them. I was able to see them.
I have to interject here. I mean, these numbers don't seem to match for 23, 24 what we passed. I'm the only one who's looking at that. That looks like it's $17,000.
So
I mean, we need some discussion on that before we go to the next slide.
Because I thought it was projected to be 500,000 or so 570,000 or
yeah,
something.
so guys, I think I'm gonna let Lindsay finish her presentation, write down your questions. We can come back to each slide. I want to let Lindsay get through what she wants to get through. And if our questions remain unanswered, we'll come back and go through her part before we move along to the future part.
Lindsay,
So I think go ahead.
are you
Allison.
able to forward that, or do you want me to try to do it?
Perhaps I could send you a PDF quick here of the slides. Would that work so everyone's able to open it?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let me just stop sharing for 1 second.
Typically, we like to have our presentations beforehand so that we can.
Yep, and I didn't do that, and I will send that to you right now.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah. Make sure it opens. Okay.
So will I find it in my Gmail?
Once you send it to me, I'll forward it to your district email.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for my shorthand typing there, but I just wanted to make sure I got it off quickly.
Be uploaded to board docs as well after our meeting.
Yeah, Lindsay, can you send it to me too, and I'll do that.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go ahead and share again.
Danielle, Karen, Ben, and Carla. I think I got everybody. You should see it now.
Is everyone seeing my screen again?
Yep.
Okay,
All right.
here's where we're at.
So to Andy's point, yes, it's obviously quite a bit different than the projection that we had in the approved budget. So like I noted in my deck summary, like this was based off of the best like information that I had. And so that's why having the tools and the resources like Baird to walk through and go through everything has been obviously a huge asset. And so once we worked through all of the expenses and looked through that, and we saw the change in the updated projection. That's why we wanted, like, we had a conversation with Allison, and we wanted to bring the board up to date as soon as possible. So budgeting for schools is not the same as it was 5 years ago. Post-pandemic culture that's addressing learning needs, SEL needs, learning loss, staff retention are all like real and costly needs that the district has. We received a one-time funding with ESSER, which obviously at the end of this year, ESSER is going to go away. So with not additional revenue coming in, it's a challenge that obviously we're facing. And so as a district, we're looking at areas this year that we can reduce spending, as noted in the savings that I talked about earlier. So that's different things where some of the supplies that we're purchasing, some of the PD that we're kind of staggering out, so it's not all in 1 year. So we're obviously making strides this year to reduce costs, but we obviously need a plan to adjust for the updated expenses, but also trying to figure out ways that we can make cuts in the coming years. And so the piece that Kim's going to talk about is how do we address where we're looking at right now, because the things that we have to look at the end of this fiscal year is that we're going to have, like I said, short-term borrow, summer school, like all of these different pieces, and we don't have a fund balance to cover all of those. If it is the worst case scenario projection, like we're still looking at a large deficit. And so what Kim has brought to the district leadership, or to Allison and I, is and Kevin, was we've talked about what are some of the short-term solutions that we can adjust to address the issues this year, and then also how do we address it moving forward. And so like I said, it's just her going through all of the different potential options, and then what are the long-term impacts for it.
Okay, any questions about
Sorry, 1 second. So Lindsay, is that the end of your?
Mhm.
Okay, would it be okay now? Because I do believe that there were a handful of questions on this particular slide. Is now a good time to do that?
Sure.
Okay. Ben?
Okay, so I'm looking at the fund balance that was posted in December. And it says 2022 to 2023 unaudited. We have an ending fund balance of $2,809,638.09. But here I'm seeing $1,009,638. So which one is it? Or am I just like mixing up the numbers?
I would have to go back and look at those, but I would go with the 1 million, just because like Baird is pulling our number from our system.
I'll email it to you.
Yeah,
Well-
it's, I have the budget publication in front of me. It said our unaudited 22-23 fund balance end was 2.8 million. So
So the
somewhere
question
between
Why?
November and now,
And then you
that
project,
number's gone down by 1.8 million.
yeah, and then the budget we passed, we were gonna have a fund balance of 570,000 at the end of 2024, and now it's gonna be negative 2.6 million.
So that's the piece, I guess, that in full transparency is, like I said, with the information and the historical information that I had, that I made my best budget assumption. But obviously with having the tools like Baird and more experience with that, that's why when we are realizing, hey, we are obviously in a much bigger deficit than we were, that's why we're coming to you.
So I'm curious exactly what tools. So what tools and how do you have access to historical information in the last month or so? And what tools do you have access to now that you didn't have or weren't utilizing? I'm trying to understand that piece.
Sure. So, and I think one of the things we have talked about is just having the historical knowledge or some of our special ed expenses. And so obviously, like when we had the major increase in special ed last year. And so when Kim and I went through our model, the model breaks down line items of the budget. So we're really able to dive into one of like line by line of last year to this year and even the prior year. What was the drastic change in it? And is it something that, you know, is it something that we could have planned for and all those pieces? So I would say the information was there, but I just wasn't looking at it in the right way. Like I needed to look at it in a different way.
So in other words, for 22-23, you missed like $1.8 million in expenses
No,
in
I
this
have to see
budget that was
why-
published.
I have to see why that is, just because I don't know if it not factoring in like a portion of the special ed transfer. I'd have to go back and look. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm
You should
looking at
know the
the
answer.
I'm looking at the general fund, like, I mean, this is that publication, right? So it's
Yeah.
in general fund, but all I can see is, I think we're all looking at the same thing.
So then you'd be off by 1.2 million this year.
Mhm.
If we're off by 1.8 million last year.
No, what she has, like what we have listed for 23-24 is using the $1 million fund balance.
Right. So subtract the 1.8 that we're off by in 2022, 2023. So technically, because you projected us to be at 500,000, so that's 3 million off. Okay, well, but subtract the 1.8 million that we're off by in the previous year, so that'd be 1.2 million, right? So we miscalculated this year's budget by 1.2 million about.
Yes, I guess I would say for the sake of this, yes.
Okay.
So
I don't think that's right, Ben. If you look at the budget, the numbers are the same for 23-24. Revenues about 17 million. Expenditures just under 20 million. There looks like they're got a little more money in expenditures. So what we're looking at with that negative $2.6 million is growing out of the wrong number for fund balance coming out of 22-23. All the error is in that bottom line right there, where that
That's
error.
only 1.8 million though.
No, that's the difference right there. That in our budget would have said 2.8 million.
Yeah.
And you can see if that said 2.8 million, we would not be looking at a negative number for 23-24. But now it says 1 million and change.
No, that's
So now we're looking at a negative fund balance at the end of
no, we
24.
would. We'd still be at about negative 800,000, right?
No. No.
Yeah,
Okay,
because you're
well-
looking at the fund balance. You're not looking at the deficit.
I think what's important here is that what I hear Lindsay saying is this is what we're looking at is accurate. What we have seen before was not accurate. So I think what matters now is talking about what is accurate. If everybody agrees with that. I have questions about the fund balance being spent more, I guess, but I don't know if that's appropriate for here. There were questions from the previous meeting where we talked about budget, but you weren't there, Lindsay, and I don't know if they got passed on to you through Allison. So I guess I'm just gonna put a pin in that, and see if it makes sense at another time. Okay, are there any other questions about this right now?
Well, I just have a procedural question, which is in December, we walked through these numbers and, they were explained to us and how we got to, a fund balance, to the original numbers that we got. So I just want to make sure I understand this 1.8 million that we're talking about. That, I mean, somehow that just wasn't part of our discussion in December.
So when we had the conversation in December, we talked about what our total deficit was with the 3.32. The ending balance is where the conversation, like where the error was in the 1.0, but the total overall deficit was still what we talked about in December.
Yeah, Andy, still you.
No, I'm done.
I'm sorry, this is, I can't find my raised hand right now.
Oh, go
So,
ahead.
so Lindsay, I just want to clarify, am I understanding that within December, the context of the conversation was specific? So somehow we weren't made aware of the $1.8 million difference, or were you not aware of it at the time?
So I would say I was not aware that there was a difference in that amount until when we had the conversation with Baird. And again, I would have to see, like, I know what you're talking about with the budget adoption document, but yes, I would say like when we had the conversation at the last meeting, and then in the time with working with Kim and looking at all of the different pieces, yes, I would, yes.
And just to follow up, and I'm sorry, because part of this is I'm just still pretty novice with this. When we have significant upticks of expenditure and it's outside of our budget or projected to be outside of our budget, do we not as a board have to come back together and approve certain things? Or is it because we're currently within our expenditures that we haven't had to change our approval?
I would say that probably hasn't been past practice, but I would say that's definitely obviously something that we're doing moving forward.
Oh, that's there was no policy, Karn, that would I don't think the old policy necessarily mandated that. The current policy under budget implementation requires notice to the board if there is strict departure or if things look different than the budget that we have talked about expenditure wise or revenue wise, I believe. But I'm having growing concerns about whether there's that language is strong enough now and whether it needs to be more specific and or pointed. I don't know. So it's a good question. I think now our current language would require this notice, hence why we are being notified right now.
I would also just add to that piece, and like I kind of noted in the exec summary last year with the expenses, that it was just kind of like the perfect storm with the multiple expenses. And so obviously with knowing like all of that happen, we don't want to obviously have a repeat of that. So having things like tools with Baird and having just being able to keep a closer eye on things, it obviously will put us in a situation where we're not going to have like the uptick of such a massive amount of expenses like we did last year.
I don't think this is appropriate for today necessarily, but at some point, I personally would like some sort of explanation, autopsy on how we went from a understanding of a $2.8 million fund balance to a $1 million. I'd want to know what happened with the accounting, but I don't know if that's appropriate for today.
No,
So
we'll
I
add
can
it
follow up.
Let's add it to a financial discussion in an upcoming cow, because those were some of the questions I think we had, Lindsay, at the meeting when you were sick. So we haven't been able to discuss those, but I have questions about the fund balance and the timing of when it was starting to be used, and notification, and who knew and what, and sort of how that went down. So I think that would be a good conversation, maybe not right now, like you said, Carla. So we'll get that on the books.
Are you okay with Kim going forward?
Yeah, so if
yeah.
you can, I would suggest, jotting down your questions on those specific questions. Think they're all valid. And definitely, don't want to leave you hanging on anything on how we got to these numbers. But so when Lindsay reached out to us, she asked us to help her with creating a Baird model for her. And what we do at Baird is we have a product, an Excel-based product, which takes all of your numbers in Skyward. So you see a report every month out of Skyward. We take all of your numbers out of Skyward, we reconcile it to the numbers you report to the state, and we plug it into our system. And then it has some auto checks on it, right? Which says, okay, here was your revenues minus your expenses equals your contribution, or dip into fund balance, your fund balance in the prior year, things like that. So we look at it a different way. So when you ask, what tool is different, we do use a very enhanced tool to look at your budget and kind of provide an analysis for you, both historically, like we show here, we can see historically because we throw in your historical numbers, as well as the current budget. And then we also project out. So the main purpose of the Baird model is to project out a 5-year forecast. So the screen you're looking at right now is your history with your current year. And as you can see, what's projected currently is a deficit budget of $3.6 million again this year. And so that results in a negative fund balance at the end of this year. Now that negative fund balance means it means physically that you will not be able to pay bills at the end of your year unless you make changes to how your funding works. So that's what we're here today, because the fund balance, while it isn't all cash in the bank, there'll become a point, and Kevin will talk about this in a little bit, where you will need additional funds to help you pay your bills. The second thing that we're here to talk about is what that then looks like next year. Okay, so as I mentioned, the Baird model projects a forecast, a 5-year forecast, and the next slide has this in numbers, and hopefully you all got that PDF by now, because I realize these might be kind of small numbers, but Lindsay and I worked together to put in some basic assumptions, and we did this rather quickly and hastily. So I wouldn't say that these are the assumptions I would go with for, for the next 5 years, no matter what. But we put in some basic assumptions, some basic revenue, some basic expense assumptions. Utilities are going to increase, transportation is going to increase, salaries are going to slightly increase possibly. And we projected your budget, and what that results in is, as you can see, a deficit budget ongoing. And that makes sense to me if I think about it, without any drastic changes between last year and this year as far as expenditure cuts, you're going to have a deficit budget again this year, and without any changes to revenue or expenses next year, that would result in the same thing. Okay. If we look at those numbers, I'll kind of take you through those basic assumptions that we plugged into the system. And again, this is just an example of a 5-year forecast with some basic assumptions built in. But going from the top line, you can see your historical last year, your current year is in blue. So going from this top line, the September membership, we assume to be flat. We assume that the per pupil increase in the biennium budget, and if you need any explanation on the numbers I'm talking about, please stop me and let me know. But the per pupil increase in the biennium budget, which is 325 this year and next year, would continue every year thereafter, as is current law. That's generally what we see in status quo assumptions right now. We assume status quo for per pupil categorical aid, and then slight increases to your equalized valuation. We did increase salaries and benefits slightly as the years go on, because salaries and benefits, theoretically would need to be adjusted up with the same staff. That results in the revenues and expenditures you see and the negative fund balance. Okay, and then on the bottom of that slide, and I'm just showing you this now so that you kind of get a baseline, because we'll go over another scenario in a few slides, is the resulting school-based tax levy and the resulting mill rate. And you'll recognize your mill rate this year is 613. Okay. So we talked about two kind of topics that we are here to discuss with the board today. So the first one is the short-term topic, and that is of your structural deficit in your current budget, and resulting in a negative fund balance at the end of this year. And that's likely going to produce a need to go to do a Fund 38 borrow before year's end. Then there's a long-term topic that we need to create a pathway forward for, which is, righting the ship and figuring out a path forward to bring that blue line back up to above the zero. Okay.
Information here, but we're not, obviously looking for decisions this evening, but we want to just give you a sense of what as Kim mentioned, the pathway is forward, given, the current situation. And so the first piece, Kim had alluded to, the structural deficit potentially resulting in negative fund balance at the end of the year. So, obviously you're going to want to have some way to maintain, the services and things that are in place right now. I assume, there'll be conversations regarding potentially, adjusting the budget between now and the end of the school year, things of that nature, finding ways, to save on expenditures and, exploring revenues. But it's very likely when you look at the detail of your cash flow, meaning, your expenditures are going out pretty evenly throughout the school year, and you're receiving revenue in blocks when you receive your tax payments. It's likely that there will be a point in time where you're going to need to borrow in order to, continue moving forward. If you're in a situation where you have negative fund balance, you aren't going to just be able to, use your current budget to make the rest of those payments. So in situations where this has happened before, school districts have borrowed using Fund 38. And what Fund 38 is it's a borrowing inside the revenue limit as opposed to outside the revenue limit. Outside the revenue limit is considered Fund 39 borrowing, and that would be a borrowing that would need to be approved at referendum. Fund 38 loan is a borrowing that is approved and paid within your revenue limit, meaning, it's going to be within the constrained part of your budget in future years. So let's just use the number of 2.6 million. If that's your deficit, it's likely you would consider borrowing $2.6 million this year with Fund 38 and paying it back in Fund 38 in future years. But what that means is it creates either a wider deficit, all things being equal, in future years, or the need for really, additional cuts in expenditures in those years. And I suspect it'll be a combination of both. So, that's one thing that will likely be considered as we move forward, just because it probably will be essential in order to maintain continuity. The other, as Kim mentioned, would be, what options are available to fix the long-term budget deficit in future years. I think it's, important that the board and administrative team work together to determine, what those needs look like. And likely consider an operational referendum along with potential, budget cuts, kind of a balance of both. And so using the forecast, you can get a sense as to what is potentially necessary and really look hard at, what those pieces are and how critically necessary they are. And then consider, what those options look like for a referendum. And we'll talk about, the timing of those options in a minute. But Ben, I know you've got your hand up. Certainly any question you might have will entertain.
Yeah, so I know you said spring or summer, but like, is there a projected month where we run out? Like, how quickly do we need to act here?
That's a great question. So I think we'd have to, dig into the cash flow in a little bit more detail based on historical cash flow. I'm suspecting that, your tightest cash flow months are probably going to be in June, July, while you're waiting for some of those tax receipts to come in.
Okay. And then, so with the loan, what kind of interest is applied to it, and over how many years do you pay it off?
And so,
is it simple interest too? Sorry.
yeah, it's simple interest. It'd be a fixed interest cost over a period of years. You would have the ability to pay it off over however many, up to 20 years. I would suspect we're going to want to use note authority, not to give, this is probably a little bit more detail than we probably need for tonight, but I'm suspecting using note authority, the board could approve the resolution. It would be subject to petition, but note authority would give you the ability to borrow it over a 10-year period of time, up to a 10-year period of time. You may want to borrow it over a shorter period of time with flexible call provisions. It would be taxable because the nature of it is that you're using it for continuing operations. It's not like for a private tax exempt purpose. So it's a taxable loan. And there are a few options available to the board to consider, and we would, work with you through those options. So traditional.
What are the going rates?
So probably today for a taxable note, you'd be looking in the mid to low 5% range. The state also has the state trust fund loan program, which is technically a taxable vehicle. That's at 6.25% presently. Probably would reach out to local lending institutions as well to determine what the best avenue is for you, and that is something that would be explored in more detail once we know really have the timing and the amount dialed in. But I think it's really important for us to start to consider it with you, knowing that it's a potential solution to move forward.
Kevin, I don't know if you see Andy has his hand up.
Oh, I did not.
Oh, no, that's all right. A couple quick follow-ups on that, along with Ben was asking. So first off, if we were going to do a Fund 38 loan, I guess my first question here is, since it has to be paid within the revenue limit, does that, and since we typically, and I don't remember how short of the limit we were, but we typically levy to the max. So if that were the case, we would have to figure out what those payments would be, and then we would have to lower our spending regardless as soon as we take on that loan. So my question would be, what would be, I don't know, the annual payment, because I mean, that would be an immediate amount of cut that we would have to make, right?
Yeah. And that's
my first question, but if you could answer that.
Sure. And you're exactly right. So it would have to be a Fund 38 loan because we wouldn't have time to go to referendum for that. And really, if you had time to get to referendum, your ask would be for additional revenue within the revenue limit authority, or not as an extension of the revenue limit authority, as opposed to a borrowing to pay for this. So it has to stay inside of your revenue limit. And you're right, it would in the future potentially, if nothing else changed, you would have to reduce your budget in the future to accommodate for that additional payment.
What would that be approximately? If, let's say it was 5%. I'm just trying to understand the math.
I'll give you
Would
that.
would that be 2.6 million?
Yeah,
Correct.
Paid 2.6 million in interest?
No, 2.6
No, principal.
what your deficit is what you would be short. So is what your structural deficit is at the end of this year. So it's basically your negative fund balance.
Yeah, wait. So if we borrow 2.6 million
Mhm.
and then we pay it back over 20 years at 5%,
Yeah, let's just say
that's
it's over-
100%.
let's say it's
I
over
could-
5 years.
Oh, so okay, so you're saying so the 20 was just an example. We might do it over 5.
Well, you would, I'm guessing that if this was the direction that you went, you would probably pay it off in less than 10 years. I'm guessing something in the neighborhood of 3 to 7
Yeah.
years.
So we'd pay a fourth of 2.6 million because 5% times 5 is 25%.
Right. Yeah.
It's every year.
Correct.
Sorry, can you, so
yeah. So what would that be amortized?
can you give us
With-
the number?
Yeah.
Well, it's 2.6 million divided by 4.
No, it isn't though. If it's because there's interest.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, that's what the interest is. It's principal times rate times time. So rate times time would be 25%. So that'd be 0.25. So 0.25 times 2.6 million.
Yeah, what's the total number though?
Okay.
Yeah, so if you were to pay it off over a 5-year time, just
$650,000 in interest.
that sounds about, let me just give you the annual payment over that 5-year period of time, roughly. I'm 6.25% because
130,000.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you
Ben,
amortize
sorry,
it,
can you
though.
just let Ben,
Yeah.
it's too many mathematicians in the,
Yeah.
whatever.
I think it's going to be about 27,000 a month.
Carla.
There's payment calculators
Mathematicians.
all over. No, it's Google. It's the fancy Google.
yeah, so if you were to pay it over 5 years,
Okay,
it's $2.6 million.
yep.
At 6.25%. Principal and interest, your annual payments would be about $530,000 a year.
And so what you're saying is we'd have to cut our budget by that much immediately? Is that in order to pay that up? Is that what you were saying?
That's my point, right? That's what we would have to do.
You know, that payment, and again, it could be structured to step up over time. You know, that's just using
To pay it off more, yeah.
repayment. You could have the payments increase over time. Ultimately, I think the goal would be to pass a operational referendum that would ultimately fix the structural deficit and give you some latitude to pay that back.
Kevin, I heard you say if this is the route you go, it's the only route I see under short-term solution. Are there alternative routes for short-term?
You know, I suspect that you could have, you know, really large cuts in the budget between now and the end of the year.
Layoffs. That's what we'd be talking about. But I don't even know if layoffs would get us to 2.6 million.
Lindsay, are you there? I can't see you.
Yep, I'm here.
Is that an actual feasible option? Large budget cuts by the end of the year to get to the what amount?
I mean, I mean, like right now we are spending less, like I said, the 1.6 million, but I think it would be cutting it too close. I think it would be tough to make all of those cuts before the end of the year.
Lindsay,
But
tell me what that $1.6 million number is. You said 1.6
so that was
million.
the difference in spend from last year to this year in Fund 10 and Fund 27.
Oh, currently we're 1.6 million less than we were at this time last year.
So that's factoring in when Kim and I kind of looked at just the overall expenses. Some of the areas were in general supplies, and I think it was professional development. Kim, I think was the other one. It was about 500,000 less in spend in just those two areas. And so, you know, and then also just some different things of we had special ed tuition drop off. So just different pieces have put us in less spend for this year, but to do another million, I think it's something that we'd be able to look at for.
I was just curious, sort of a hot take on that, because if there's one option, then I want to understand more about the one option about potential downsides, like one realistic option.
So I had a couple of follow-ups on that. and I
Karen
just
has her
want-
hand up too, but
Well, I
okay,
had a few
go ahead,
questions,
okay.
but this is the follow-up I was asked, which is, what if you take out the loan and then you can't pay it back in the time being? You know, what does that do? I mean, in other words, if we can't pay back, I mean, I guess it's a default. The bottom line is we can't take out a loan legally that's going to be more than that that's going to have a payment that's more than that levy limit.
Right.
So, okay,
Yep. And so,
Yeah.
you're kind of forced to make the cuts moving forward if you can't get the operational piece passed.
so let me ask you two very quick follow-ups and then I'm done. And I appreciate your answers. One is, if we're talking about an operational referendum, is it theoretically possible to have one, prepped? I mean, it's till January. Is it theoretically, possible to have one prepped by, the spring election date?
Yes.
Or-
For forwarding. So here's the future slide in this presentation that describes what the election dates are.
Yeah,
So this year, when I say this year, 2024, moving forward, you have spring and fall election dates. The most common date presently that people are working with right now would be the April 2nd, 2024 date. But in order to hit that date, you need to pass a resolution to go to referendum by January 23rd of 24 in order to do that. And that would be a lot of work to, get to the solution by the end of January to begin educating the public on the need for April, I suspect.
Andy, we've talked about August and November.
Yep.
August isn't typically a time they would put it on the ballot because of low turnout, but then there's been a little bit of discussion that abortion might be on the ballot in August, which would be probably a huge turnout. The other piece is, because we're doing the facilities work and we have a spring survey, we could weave some questions into our spring survey for the community around like operational priorities, so that we'd have some of that data too going into.
I think the facilities planning had to be put on hold, period. And I'm just gonna say that right now.
So one of the things that we talked about is prioritizing, and obviously operational is a priority. So some of the scenarios we've discussed are, so if we did an operational in August and it passed, and the facilities feedback from the survey was positive, then we could go facilities in November. But if we did operational in August and it didn't pass, then we'd have to bring operational back as a priority in November, and facilities would have to hold till next year. So I hear you loud and clear that the priority has to be operational.
I think the other piece is if you pass it in the January referendum, we wouldn't have the funds in time to address the end of this year. Right, Kevin? I'm saying that correctly.
Well, in any case, any of these options, you would have the ability with any three of these dates to have that operational levy in place for 24-25. Even at the November election, you would have the ability to certify two levies, when you do your budget in 2024. And if it's successful, use the levy that has the operational increase in it. So all three of these options would give you the ability to increase your operational budget in 2024, in your 2024 budget.
But Lindsay, I think what you're saying is it wouldn't necessarily make sense to push for April and not get communication out, because that wouldn't help us at the end of this year. Like it wouldn't be a benefit versus August or November, where we could get more education out to the community.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Correct.
There are two questions. Kevin, if you want to address them.
Sure.
Before we move.
Pardon?
So you guys may or may not have heard me say this, although other people in this room, so to speak, certainly have. Finance is not my strength, right? I have a lot of strengths. This is not one of them. However, it seems to me that when it comes to borrowing, the people in the better financial state tend to have a better borrowing power. So how do these projections impact our capacity to even access borrowing funds for the short term?
Can I just add to that question? Because I had the exact same one, is that I was told that dipping into our fund balance would be a ding to our rating and would impact our ability to borrow.
And certainly it's a credit consideration, and stronger fund balance is a stronger credit. We would, have to test the markets and test the credit rating to see what would happen as a result of that. But it certainly does raise a challenge.
Kevin, can you not see there's so Carla?
Sorry, I did have one more question.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
I was trying to remember it, and I super helpfully jotted down how. That was all my note. But Lindsay and Allison, have you brought forward, have you detailed any specific cuts that you would recommend to the existing budget to complement a Fund 38 loan, or are you just not considering that?
No, in my mind, the Fund 38 loan is to reconcile us for this year. And so it would be cuts for next year and moving forward. And then obviously, there's timelines with like we would have to have those recommendations to you guys by like March, end of March, early April, because we have non-renewal timelines if there's staffing impact. But it would be more 24, 25 and moving forward. This year would be smaller things like we talked about, pausing professional development, like conferences, things like that, but not like any staffing for this year. So it would just be smaller things.
And then Carla and Andrew both have hands up.
Carl, I think.
Okay, sure. And I will lower my hand. So I just want to share that I'm having a physical anxiety attack right now. I'm guessing I'm not the only board member, and I just feel sick. These numbers are so different from the numbers we got in June and the numbers we got in September, and even in November, and what we voted on, that it's shocking. And they're so profoundly different. So I'm a combination of frustrated and anxious and scared for our students. So I just want anyone who needs to hear this to know that I'm just so stunned by the change in numbers, by the fact that we're looking at a $3.6 million deficit for this year. We had such a huge conversation around this. This is just such a failure in our accounting of what's happening in our district that I'm tongue-tied by it, like I'm dry in the mouth, right? And so I just don't know how we can be talking about referenda around buildings and facilities planning so blithely. That all has to be on hold. I mean, we can keep doing the work. There's no way we can be talking about referendum in my mind until we can raise confidence and competence, right? You've heard me say this. There's no way a member of the public looking at this is going to have confidence in us being able to manage a facilities referendum. We can't even get our annual operational budget straight. So we got to fix this ship first. And in my mind, I think we still need to do the facilities planning. We obviously need to be doing the facilities work. But to say that's a second, there's only one priority right now, which is that we have to be able to run our schools decently, right? And I lose confidence when I hear $3.6 million deficit, but then Lindsay, somehow you seem to be saying maybe it'll only be 1 million. How do we not know, right? How am I not able to hear a clear answer about where we are and what our actual deficit is going to be, right? If we're $1.6 million ahead, I mean, these numbers are just changing, right? I'm sitting here not even knowing what the amount of a loan would be. I don't have any confidence right now in our accounting. So I'm going to need help coming up that ladder of confidence before I can feel confident about any vote about anything, right? Because I'm sitting here with just a massive question mark in my mind about what the hell is happening with our budget. And I'm so shocked. I'm not going to sleep tonight. I'm not going to sleep tomorrow night, right? So I just need you to know that that's where I am. And so I really think I don't know if other board members agree, but I need a detailed breakdown of what happened. You know, I need an autopsy on what happened in the last 2 years, not blaming people before, because all the numbers, all the in and out, we have that data somewhere. We're writing checks, we're getting money in. We've got to be able to know what went wrong and how it's not going to go wrong again. When constituents call me, because people are going to hear, and we're going to start getting calls. I want to be able to answer that. And as a community member and a parent, I want to know the answer to that stuff. And I'm not an accountant, so I don't necessarily even know what questions to ask. So I need the experts in-house and our Baird experts to tell me what I need to know and not expect me to defer at this point. All right, so that's what I'm looking at in the 2 to 3 months ahead. I want the 101, and I want to know what happened. And you can't lean in on me to know what questions to ask because I'm not an accountant. You can lean on me at this point, and I usually hold back to just interrogate. Say I'm a lawyer and a retired trial lawyer. I will interrogate this until I'm confident. I don't want anyone to take it personally, but just know that that's the road ahead for me, because this is bad. Is really, really bad. And I hope we can work through it. I hope we can all work through it together and stay professional and stay clean on this. But right now, I'm just like having a physical response to this information. So that's what I need to share.
Thanks for sharing, Carla.
Danielle, if I can thank you very much. 3 quick questions. So first of all, I just want to make sure I understand. If we need this money, to deal with a budget that we're going to run out of money on, I guess approximations aside, right? In precision aside, how can we not do something as of April 2nd if it was a referendum or a loan? How can we not, how can we, in a budget that ends in June of 2024, how can we have a primary after the fact? I guess that's my first question.
I agree that we have to do something. I was just saying that I was
Well,
feeling.
there's a question for Mr. Mullen, though.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, let me just kind of paraphrase that. Are you saying, if we were to go in April, then we would have the answer in time to, help our budget soon?
I mean, I realize we're in a hole right now anyways, but I mean, aren't we, by pushing off until, our budget year ends and, we're trying to plug the hole.
Mhm.
So how do we plug the hole after the fact?
Yeah,
I mean,
in any of these 3 dates, the first collection for new revenue would be for the following budget. So our tax levy for this year has already been levied. And
so for a referendum, it's always going to be after the fact, so we're never going to be able to recoup it. So I mean, I guess so if we're in a deficit, we don't have cash. So the only way that we get cash is by taking out a loan right now. And so I mean, am I missing something? The only thing we can do is to cut 650,000 or whatever the hell the number is a year right now and ask for a loan. Otherwise, we're bankrupt, right? Am I wrong?
Yes, we're gonna have to figure that out, correct?
So
I'm with you, Randy. That's how I read it.
Okay.
Alone and cuts.
So first question is that. Secondly is if that's the case, I just lost another question there. But when it comes to an audit, and Carla, you were mentioning audit, and I was thinking about this too. I mean, we have an audit that's done every year. How come this doesn't get caught in a regular audit? And do we need to go back and do a forensic audit of some kind? I mean, you know, in other words, to figure out
Well,
what the hell
I think,
happened.
you know, some of the information that is part of the projection was a result of the final audit this year. Is that correct, Lindsay?
Yes. So that's why I have to go back and look and just see like how the numbers were there, because our auditors they're going to, they have to cross-check and balance everything. That's the whole point of the audit.
But, you know, shouldn't we have had an audit completed? I mean, don't we normally accept an audit report in January?
We haven't gotten it back from them yet.
When do we expect to have that back?
I can reach out and find out an update.
That'd be good. I think that we need to have administration come up with immediate cuts of $50,000 a month, because I don't know how we can sit on this. I guess, you know, I have lots of other thoughts here, but you know, I'm trying to figure out what we can do, you know, to deal with the issue before we don't have any money to pay people. Because if that happens, then we really are SOL, right? So, I mean, I think these are, you know, the best options. I mean, my only concern is what happens if we're bankrupt? How do we, what happens to a district that goes bankrupt? You know, I mean, what in the case that we don't get that loan or we don't get that referendum and we can't pay money, what happens to our district?
So can I just, I'm gonna interject here. I think you're going on the exact right path and you're thinking through all of these things. How, you know, how we think through them as well when we're thinking through, okay, you know, this fiscal year versus next fiscal year, operational referendum. You asked a great question about, now we take out this loan in this spring, it's 5 years, we have to pay it back over 5 years. We add that to our expenses, right? So now we just increased our expenses, but before you were saying we couldn't afford our expenses before. So if we had to make $3.5 million in cuts before this slide, to get to a balanced budget, now we have to make $4 million in cuts to get to a balanced budget, right? So the April referendum would put in place your operational referendum, you know, your additional dollars in your budget for 24-25. You'd still need to go to cash flow your summer, right? But then you would have that known that you were going to not be in the scenario you're talking about where you would have the revenue to come in. An August or November referendum, when you go out to get that loan in the spring or summer, you don't know if you're going to pass that August or November referendum. So what you'll likely do as a board and as a leadership team then is to say, okay, as you're putting your budget together for 24-25, knowing that there is the possibility that a new referendum, you know, that we'll talk about how that works, added on doesn't pass, then what happens? And that's kind of what I hear you're asking, right? If we ask for more money and we don't get it, then what happens? Because we're already in a negative fund balance and we don't have money to pay that back. You have to have a budget ready and waiting to be able to sustain that option as well, right? And so those are the really tough decisions that Allison is talking about in the next couple of months. You know, they don't need to be outside of putting expenditure reductions in the current year, but they need to go in tandem with that to have the discussion of saying, okay, best case scenario, we ask for X dollars for an operational referendum when we get it. Worst case scenario, we don't get it. What's the worst case scenario budget look like? And how do we proceed as a district, you know, knowing what that could be? So I do think that you kind of run in this case 2 budgets. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess physically speaking, right? I mean, we are going to run out of money. Okay, so if we have a hypothetical $24 million budget, right, it's $2 million a year. So at some point, you know, in let's say May, you know, we're going to run out of money. To me, that tells me that we need to have in place by May a source of money, and we need to have, you know, a way to pay off that source of money.
Mhm.
So my question for you is, right, if we don't have that source of money in place, either right now, this year, this fiscal year or next year, and, we have no way of getting it in because of revenue limits and because we don't pass referendum, what happens when we're struggling to pay stuff off? I mean, I guess my question is there any lifeline out there, or are we going to just literally, stop paying people and stop paying bills?
Yeah, and I think, that's, while we're here this evening is, I think we want to begin to explore, what that option is for, what those options are for a potential loan in the event that we need it for this year to cover expenses at the end of the year, assuming that we're in this deficit position.
Sorry, can you pause? You keep saying like, so in the event we need it, I'm understanding that
We need it.
Mhm.
I think the answer to Andy's question must be the schools close. Isn't that the direct answer to Andy's question? If we can't pay
No,
our bills, we won't pay teachers and
you're
they
gonna
won't
have
come to school.
You're gonna have to find, if you don't have the resources to pay the loan back, you're going to have to cut the budget by, that amount moving forward.
Okay. I
sorry.
mean, I understand you don't want to say it, right? But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm setting this up because I'm trying to say, look, if we don't get the money one way, and if we don't get the money the other way, and we don't get the money, then we're gonna have to close things up.
Well, you
somehow.
still have some money, right?
Yes.
So you still
do?
have, you'll still have your regular revenue limit authority, right? So you'll still have something. So you will plan a budget with, while it's not what you would want, and it's not the same programs and services, you will still have some
It's not
funds
zero, correct.
that you will need to be able to plan a budget to move forward with.
All right. Well, I also just want to point out that the deadline for giving administrative notice of non-renewals is usually the end of the month of this month. And I'm not suggesting that we do that any willy-nilly, but we should consider whether or not we are going to be taking any actions across, not just teachers like Allison mentioned, but anyone else for non-renewal purposes. I mean, that's a deadline. I'm not saying we should do it. I'm just saying we should be cognizant of that deadline. So
I think that's part of the reason that, when Lindsay reached out to us in December, the four of us had talked about bringing this to you sooner rather than later. And we don't have all the answers or all the solutions today. We can't tell you the drop dead date of your cash flow need right now. That is in the next steps, is to be able to tell you that, is to be able to say, okay, here's how we sort these pathways out. But we know deadlines are approaching, we know decisions are made, and we know there's spending happening right now, right? Every Friday we cut checks. And so we wanted to make sure, Allison and Lindsay wanted to make sure that this was brought to the board as soon as they were kind of got their heads around it. And now we'll move forward with the next step. So if I may, I'm going to step through the next pieces of the presentation. I think from what I hear, you guys are a pretty astute board. So I don't think I need to spend too much time on this. If you have questions, stop me. But I want to get to the next steps that we had kind of talked about prior to this meeting, so that you know kind of what to expect in the next couple of weeks from your leadership team. Does that work for everybody? Okay, so just so that we're all on the same page, when we're talking about an operational referendum, it is, as Kevin said, within the revenue limit tax levy. So an operational referendum would increase the school-based tax levy. The Fund 38 then would, and Fund 10, the Fund 38 payment, annual payment, and Fund 10 would be inside of that revenue limit authority. And that would then increase the school-based tax levy. So that's what you would ask your constituents for. And this was your levy this year. The tax levy is divided by your property value, multiplied by 1,000, and that gets you your mill rate. Okay, we're all familiar with these equations. There's two types.
Could you just go back?
Yeah.
So one other thing that I think is worth noting, and we'll come back to this, in this year's current budget, you have $1,751,000 budgeted for Fund 80 in community service. Last year, your need in community service was roughly $550,000. So there's an additional $1.2 million that is being used for capital project improvements in Fund 80. I believe at the school with the childcare service providing or provision, but that $1.2 million next year, if it's not needed, provides some capacity. It's not spendable dollars outside of Fund 80, but if it's not needed next year, that's $1.2 million of capacity that could be, asked for in that operational levy. So,
Right,
I
sorry.
think that's an opportunity.
You're saying if we don't spend money in the Fund 80, the money that we levied this year, if
You
it's
would be
not
spending-
spent,
yeah.
it somehow supports us next year.
Yeah,
So-
so it's more of an opportunity. So the $1,750,000 that you levied in Fund 80 this year would need
Yeah.
to continue to be spent in Fund 80 for improvements that they were
Yes.
planned for. But next year, if you didn't, you as a board could decide not to levy that additional $1.2 million outside of your revenue limit, because that Fund 80 is outside of your revenue limit. That would
Mhm.
give you some flexibility if you were asking for additional revenues of $1.2 million without necessarily impacting the tax rate. So, that is some flexibility in your budget this year.
So your school-based tax levy could stay the same if the voters allowed you to move the 1.2 from, this is by voter approval, you could move the 1.2 million in here that you levied additionally in Fund 80 this year into your revenue limit tax levy. And as a result, then you don't have a mill rate change, right? Or you would have mill rate change, but you don't have a total
the
tax
levy
levy
change,
change.
yeah.
And that would be a one-time vote.
That's the operating referendum that we're talking about. So you have that little bit of flexibility within your operating referendum. It's like in order to say this was a zero impact. So the first 1.2 million of any additional operating referendum, and we'll look at that in the next couple of slides, would be a zero impact, because you could, if 550,000 was what you really needed in Fund 80 to be sustainable in Fund 80 with your Good Hope building, you could use that, because you've kept that levy at the current rate, so you could use it and swap it out for an operational referendum with voter approval.
So
Okay,
we could
so
take
it's
the
not-
one, oh, go ahead.
It's not like you're assuming we're gonna levy 1.2 million in Fund 80 every year. You're saying for 1 year, it could offset the mill rate effect.
Yeah,
And
let's take a look at
next
that
year.
in the next couple of slides. How about I bet you'll see it here.
I jumped the gun, but as long as the balloon was here, I wanted to point it
Yeah.
out.
We can come back to this too. Okay, so we have two types of operational referendums. One is recurring and one is non-recurring, and oftentimes those operational referendums are not used for new construction. That's a capital debt referendum. The operational referendums are for salaries, benefits, curriculum, instruction. You guys are already in a non-recurring operational referendum, right? So you're in the 4th year of a 5-year non-recurring operational referendum. This year you levied an additional 1.58 million through voter approval. You still have that non-recurring operational referendum ability next year to levy an additional 1.58 million. After that, without another approval from voters, that would fall off. Okay, so nothing beyond that. What we're talking about is, if you go back to those timelines, if you were to pass another operational referendum, whether it's recurring or non-recurring, in the year of 2024, so either April, August, or November, you could add in additional operating referendum dollars to this line and then make it go further. Okay, So let's look at what that looks like. So this is the slide I showed you before, okay, where we see the deficit of 3.8 million next year. And then we have a fund balance, a negative fund balance. And then you'll notice down here, here's that 14.9 total school levy. Okay. And then right here, this is the line we're looking at. This is the line that we're going to change, is your 1.5. This is your current year. Okay. If we change that number and assume we're adding 4.5 million, and I just picked numbers. The numbers I picked result in a positive fund balance back to a 15% percentage of expenditures in 4 years. So by all means, this will change. Like I said, these are based on a number of assumptions that we put together. But this is just an example scenario to say, okay, here's how this would work, right? So to say we would ask the voters to add in additional funds this next year and then step that up in the years after by however much. Now, this is probably going to result in in tandem an operational referendum, as you've talked about, expenditure cuts, right? You're probably not going to end up asking for 9.5 million, but that's up to the board how you go about doing that. But a couple of things at play here. One, included in all of this, yes, you would need to increase your expenses by the amount of your Fund 38 loan payback, right, every year, and that would be factored into this. You would want to levy enough or you'd want to get enough revenue to start to have a positive fund balance so that you didn't get in the situation that you're in this year. This is assuming you can make 180,000 in cuts next year, and hopefully you can. So, and that by 27, 28, or hopefully sooner, if you could, if you could do that better than that, you can get back to a 15% or a board approved fund balance percentage of Fund 10 expenditures. Okay, so obviously that does things to your total levy and your mill rate. Again, you guys are in the current referendum scenario. We can certainly, and we will certainly, if you get into the scenarios where you want us to come back and talk more about what are our referendum options, what does a referendum look like, what is the timeline, we will do that. But we wanted to present this to you because it does include that payback of that loan as well. And it's a whole picture that we want to be thinking about at the same time, in tandem, one with the other. Okay. But I think all the questions today are exactly the right questions that you're asking. So we have
a moment for a question.
Yep, go ahead, Ben.
So you're suggesting that in 2024, 2025, we pass an additional $4.5 million referendum. Well, not suggesting, but that's what this sheet says.
That's what this, yeah. So it would
Then,
say 4.5 in year 1, and then 7.5 year 2, 8.5 year 3, 9.5.
So why the increase of 3 million and then 1 million the rest of the way?
I used it to balance the budget and to get your fund balance to a positive number by 25.
And it steps up as your old revenue authority, the 1,580,000 expires. It fills in that gap as well.
Yeah, and we now have policies that says we have to maintain a 10% fund balance. So we've created a policy obligation for ourselves to right this ship and get that fund balance back up.
Yeah, and so you'll want to look to that to say, we chose this number and this plan because this is getting us to that.
And Andy had alluded to the fact the question I think Andy had earlier was, well, if we have to, in the interim between now and the time when either we make adjustments to the budget or have an operational increase, what is our credit quality? What does our credit quality look like to a lender as we're trying to put that interim financing in place? So part of that answer is that, you know, developing a plan as a board and as an administrative team will go a long way to providing comfort or, you know, some strength to that argument as you discuss it with potential lenders.
Fine.
So at one point this year, there was a conversation that we had where it was suggested that DPI was unhappy with the amount of fund balance we had, and so it was necessary to bring it down. That was my takeaway. Maybe I misunderstood it.
Oh,
So
that
I'm
was in Fund 50. That was in Fund 50, food service, not the general fund.
okay. So what is the usual recommendation for a fund balance? I mean, that's really like your safety net, is that right? So what should a district be aiming for in their fund balance?
Yeah, so I would say, you know, 10% would be on the low end of what, you know, is what many districts in the state have. But it depends on a lot of, you know, different variables. I think, you know, if you were to look at kind of the standard, it's generally about 3 months of expenditures in fund balance. So 20 to 25%. So I would say any bracketed 15 to 25% is probably generally the norm.
A lot of districts will have a policy, and certainly I'm sure if you've gone through these policies recently, which will say to a percentage enough to avoid short-term borrowing. And so because short-term borrowing costs you money, right? So to have a fund balance to get you through those few months at the beginning of the year where you have to wait until your tax revenue comes in. So that's what's Kevin about the 3 months and the short-term borrowing, things like that. But certainly at least 10% is just generally speaking what we see.
Carla?
So I don't know what's left in this presentation, so I don't know if I'm asking out of turn, but I'm sitting here wondering what the timeline is for when we're gonna, Allison, when you think that you'll be able to come to us with information on proposed cuts and when we would be looking at going out for loan.
So
oh, next steps, there it is.
So next steps, you know, obviously, it's been discussed already, you know, leadership has to look at what your cash flow needs are and determine, you know, when we think that critical time is for that cash need. And you know, kind of concurrent with that, start to reach out and look for, you know, potential funding solutions for meeting this year's obligation. So I think that would be strong step one. And then also the harder work of, you know, figuring out how to work through the structural deficit in the budget that's presently there, you know, pathways to raising revenue, as well as opportunities for reducing expenses. You know, I think that other pieces that are out there, you know, do you look at, you know, big pieces in your budget that may be capital projects? I don't think that there are lots of them out there. That may be one-time expenditures in your budget that could be put on hold. That might be a consideration within the current budget. And then other resources that you know, might want to consider. And so I don't think that it's necessarily part of the same conversation. But I know that the Good Hope building has, you know, been out there in terms of an asset that you know, kind of wrestling with in terms of what to do with it. You know, so, you know, that at some point may come into the conversation as well.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board?
I would like to know a more firm timeline. When are we going to get information?
Yeah, can we commit?
Do you think that our next board meeting next week, Allison, you could come back to us with timeline around or loan
Cuts.
information as well as cuts?
I could come back with timeline. I don't know about cuts. I think I have to have some more conversations with this team and dig into some of those details that Lindsay dug into with this team. I just asked Lindsay this week for spreadsheets on with staffing, so we can start looking at staffing, but again, I think that's more for 24, 25.
So can we clarify that? Because what I heard Andy saying was, if we seek a loan and are approved, that we need, or I guess Baird, someone from Baird, could you say, do we need to make cuts for this particular year? Like that would equal the amount of our annual payment, or could we push those cuts into the next year's budget?
I think you could push them into the next year's budget. But, you know, I'm not the lender, so, you know, I can't commit to what they would ask for, but we've seen, you know, other districts work through this in the past. And so, you know, I think a commitment to working through the budget is going to be helpful. But I'd like to, you know, obviously reach out and, you know, start those conversations so I have better direction in terms of, you know, what those options look like. So, you know, I can't say.
And
Okay,
I
sorry.
think Andy's
I
point
would
was-
say it, like, in my opinion, the next first step would probably be to analyze your cash flow and get a really good understanding as to what that need is and when. You know, and I think that that's, you know, in terms of critical timing, critical paths, that's it. And, you know,
How long
obviously,
would that take?
Kim and I are working on that.
Okay, so Baird is embedded in this process, right? You're
we
gonna be
haven't we haven't been up till this point. We can certainly assist going forward.
Is that gonna cost? How are we affiliated with you guys right now? Are we paying you for your consultation services or what?
You have purchased our forecasting model product,
Okay.
which includes a basic cash flow template, which we can work with Lindsay to complete.
And how long would it take to complete that?
I only hesitate because I have a full calendar next week. So
Well,
Kevin, what are you thinking?
well, and I think administratively, you know.
Oh my
Lindsay,
gosh.
Administratively, Lindsay, you have historical, you know what your cash has looked like in previous years. I think that that's a good place to start. We know what the budget is. We know what the budget is paying for, and that can be projected out. So, you know, I don't know that.
Yeah, we have the cash flow document that we always have to provide anytime we've gone to short-term borrow. So we have that information. And then I think it's just going through that and just reviewing and seeing what our upcoming expenses are for this year.
And just as a suggestion, I would also say reconciling, you know, it to what actual cash looked like last year. Yeah.
So can anybody tell us a reasonable time?
So I guess would February cow be okay? Because if, you know, that would give us a couple weeks so Kim and I can connect. So,
Well,
and I think Baird was already planning on being at the February cow.
I think that
Certainly.
anything that we do has to be in January, because if we're gonna discuss options that we have that are subject to the timeline, including non-renewals into the next year, we need to have non-renewals into next year by the end of January. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that.
Only for administrators.
And so administrators, you know, I'm just gonna say, everyone should be on the chopping block. We're looking at stuff.
I'm not saying that they shouldn't. It's a lot easier for me to analyze that piece than it is teachers and paraprofessionals and secretaries, which is a much larger group of people, is all that I'm saying.
I understand that, but
The first step is the cash flow. That's what we're hearing. The first step is analyzing cash flow. Could we have a special meeting the week after our school board meeting? That's 2 weeks.
Danielle?
Yeah.
Originally you said, can we bring a timeline to the board meeting? Would that be the place? I'm not saying they're not going to analyze the cash flow, but just bringing you an actual timeline of all the next steps. mapped
Yeah,
out?
yes, I think that makes sense. But I guess I'm saying if the first next step, according to
Right.
Kevin, is analyzing cash
At the
flow,
same time,
that
yeah,
should be happening right now.
exactly.
So will that take more than 2 weeks?
We lost, she
So
was,
if
the
it,
computer
I
died.
see you
Hi,
shaking.
my apologies. I think my computer told me
Mine's about to die too.
had
So
an error when we were hosting the presentation. We will work with Lindsay to make the expected timeline that Allison puts in place for sure.
So could we potentially have, added to, do we want to add it to
I
February?
think
How?
we could bring it
Let's-
to the January.
No, sorry guys, sorry. I think I'm trying to say I think we should do this in the next 2 weeks. Like 2 weeks would be a reasonable timeline. Because the board has to do the board will meet obviously as well to discuss this. And so I think that's appropriate information. The timeline is great next week at our board meeting. The next,
January 17th. Can we do
Yep.
cash flow January 17th too?
if you can do it then, great.
I'm
It's
asking,
like you might not be able to. That's why I was trying to give you more time.
yeah, I'm asking Kim, can we share cash flow?
I think we
Yeah,
should plan. I
I'm-
think we should try to, and like I can work with the people that prepare our cash flow document too for short-term borrow. So I think we
Okay.
can do it by January.
Okay, so you're saying you
So-
can have it at our board meeting next week?
Yeah.
Is that
But,
Yes,
the 17th, right? Yeah.
yes.
okay?
I,
So
Lindsay,
First next step.
I can't commit to that. I'm
No,
just gonna personally, okay.
Yeah, no, I will probably lean on PMA who helps us with that
Okay.
cash flow for short-term borrowing.
And, certainly I will begin, discussions, to find out what fruitful avenues there are for, lending on that Fund 38 piece.
Okay.
You need to consider getting outside help to support in this effort, or is it something that you guys can do, in conjunction with Lindsay, on your own? I mean, one thing I've been wondering about is whether or not we need additional support, additional staffing to kind of walk through any of these tasks, especially, in a pinch. I don't know how you get it in a pinch, but, I mean, is this something that, Baird and Lindsay together can knock out in 2 week time that Danielle's suggesting? I mean, are we pretty confident here?
Certainly not all the answers to that. Should the board and leadership decide, I think the great next step is to kind of have everybody recap, what their questions are, what the next steps are, and have Allison put together a timeline. And along with that timeline, I would assume there would be roles and responsibilities, right? And then Allison and Lindsay can talk. Should the board want to engage Baird further beyond the forecasting software that we have, we do offer further engagements where I would come in and help assist further with that. But that's something that I think let's let leadership talk through how that process is going to look in the next couple of months. We talked through a lot today, and then they can outline for you a timeline of those deliverables and who they need to have help them. And it sounds like the board is supportive of figure out what you need to do. And then does that work for everyone? If come back at the next board meeting with a timeline of deliverables like Allison had suggested.
Yeah, that
Along
works.
with the cash flow.
Well, so my concern about the cash flow, Lindsay, is if we're looking at working with Baird, but you're not going to be able to work with them, you're going to work with someone else, then it's going to be
No.
information outside of what.
No,
Like-
so like PMA is the people that like they're the ones that hold our investment series banking account. So they're the ones that are that prepare our cash flow
They
documents.
typically do
for the
your
short-term
cash flow analysis. Yep.
So a lot of times they work in tandem with, because they're not linked to Forecast 5 or Baird, like PMAs, I feel like a little bit more neutral and works with everybody.
Okay. So next steps will be timeline at our next board meeting, along with an assessment of cash flow.
And you're gonna look into some Fund 38 options as well?
And Kevin's gonna start sussing out loan possibilities, right? What that looks like, timeline. Okay. I appreciate everyone's time, everyone being here. Is there anything else that we need to cover in this arena tonight? I think it's probably a lot of processing that needs to happen now. So follow up with questions in an email to Allison or myself, or CC me if you have questions for Allison. She can pass them along to Baird. Okay, thank you. So I think that's Kevin and Kim. Appreciate your time. I think we'll be seeing a lot more of you in the near future.
Appreciate your attention to all of this. I know it's a lot to absorb, but we just felt it was really important to get the conversation started, obviously.
Yep, agreed.
And as a last note, can I just point out that seeing Kim in stereo is very quirky and cool.
Me?
I see you on 2 screens. It's awesome.
Oh,
It took me a while. I was like, God, they look so much alike. I just want you to know that
I'm
for the
just
last
on
few
my
minutes,
phone.
I've been
Can you see
processing
me
whether
here
you're the
too?
same person
Yeah.
or not. And that's where my head is.
No,
I'm
we
just
like
like,
it was some levity. It was a little bit of levity.
a little levity.
Okay, so moving on. I don't have the agenda in front of me anymore. I apologize. Is
Motion to adjourn? Is there
there's
anything
no
else?
future or there's nothing. It's just a motion to adjourn. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Any objections to adjourning, folks?
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, have a good night.
All right, see ya.
Night.
Nice to meet you all.